So hi there everyone, Mr. Burke here, and today I'm going to be talking to you about using Microsoft Excel or Google Sheets, really any spreadsheet program, and how spreadsheets are extraordinarily powerful for things like data analysis, but hopefully this will also show you some other interesting applications of spreadsheets. But today, in this specific example, we're going to be analyzing reaction time from your class data and showing you how to use Excel or Google Sheets to not only calculate averages for large data sets, but also how we can use specific functions in spreadsheet programs to extract certain data from a large data set and analyze that separately without having to make a whole new spreadsheet. So I'm going to pop over into Excel and start showing you how you can use the two functions of average and AVERAGEIF to analyze this data set. So here I am on my computer and I'm zoomed out so we can see the whole data set, and also so that I can give you a little bit of a lay of the land, because most students don't have a lot of experience with spreadsheets. So let's talk about a couple things to help you get your bearings, and then we'll dive in and show you how to do the actual calculations. So a spreadsheet program uses coordinates like a map to help identify the individual cells on the spreadsheet. And the spreadsheet can go on forever. I'm sure there's some type of limit eventually in the tens and tens of thousands, but the spreadsheet is basically infinite in both directions. So I can go anywhere on the spreadsheet, but all the data fits right here. And the rows are numbered down the side, and the columns are lettered across the top. So every cell has a specific location, whether that cell is A1 or F58 or AA 1900. There is a specific location for every cell on the spreadsheet, and that's super helpful for what we're about to do. And it's also helpful for being able to talk to somebody about it. So anyway, in this data, I got all of the data from column B, C, D, E, and F from you. When you submitted your data via the Microsoft form, it got dropped into a spreadsheet. So advantage number one is that spreadsheets can ingest information a lot easier than a graphing calculator or pretty much any other form of data analysis can. So in this case, the Microsoft form created this spreadsheet, and then I took some time to clean it up to get rid of some things that didn't need to be there for this example or for our work. But all of that information came from you. And if I had enough forethought, I would have had you identify your class period, so I didn't have to do that. But then I went through and just added that because I forgot to do it. But what we're going to do with this spreadsheet is look at the overall averages for all of our trials. So we did 5 trials as part of HBS lesson 2.2.4, where you did a fastball reaction time, task 1, task 2, task 3, and task 4. So there are 5 different sets of data for us to analyze. And if you look at the bottom, we're going to be looking at the averages, the overall averages from all 3 classes, all combined. But then we're also going to break out each class's data. So now that we kind of understand what we got going on here, I'm going to zoom in so that you can understand or see the formulas that I'm going to write a little bit better. So let me move my head to the other side of the screen there, and let's scroll down to the bottom. So again, I have an overall average, and in each of these cells, I'm going to calculate that overall average for each of the different trials, and then we're going to use another function, and we're going to calculate the average for each trial for each class separately. But first, let's start off with the overall average. So for column B, which is our fastball reaction time, if I want to put an average in here, I need to tell Microsoft Excel that I want it to calculate an average and not just show me the word average. If you look over here where I have the word average, you see up in this formula box up top that it just has the letters that form the word average. That, though, is also a command that I can give Excel. And the way that all spreadsheet programs will receive a command is if the box up there starts with an equal sign. So I'm going to type an equal sign. And you can actually even see over here, Microsoft Excel is starting to try to predict what I want it to do. So it's saying, do you want me to sum some type of information? I don't want a sum, I want an average. So I'm going to type the word average. And it's starting to predict over here as well what I might want. So there are lots of different types of average, but in this case, we just want the basic regular average. And then you can see down below the formula bar is a little helper tool, which is trying to prompt me and say, okay, so since you're doing the average function, tell me the number you want me to average. So if I wanted to take this number, I could type every number that you see here. I could sit there and type 0.440, comma, and then type the next one and the next one and the next one. And that's what it's saying you can do here. But that's not really an advantage over using a graphing calculator. However, what is an advantage is I can use my mouse and I can click and drag to select cells. So I can click, and while holding down the mouse, I can drag it up and I can select all of the data. So I'm going to scroll down so I'm not selecting that word fastball, and I let go. And you see all that did was type in for me the coordinates B2 colon B54. So that is how you can select cells, but you can also type that, which we'll talk about in a second. So what we've told here is say, Excel, I need you to do some work. That's what the equal sign means. I want you to average the cells, the values in cells B2 all the way to B54. But if we hit enter, say do that, and we hit enter, notice that in this case, Excel completed the formula for us by putting a closing parentheses. Whenever I have a mistake, especially with a complex function in a spreadsheet program, I start counting parentheses, because if there's an opening parentheses, there's got to be a closing parentheses. So that's all we've asked Excel to do, and it instantly updated that information for us. And there's the average for this data set. So the average for fastball for all three classes combined is 0.438 seconds. And one of the other things that's really great about spreadsheets is that this number down here, it's showing me a number, but again, what's in the cell is actually an equation. So I can edit the information that is in that cell. I can use this button up here underneath of number to increase the number of decimal places, and I can also decrease them to make the data uniform, but I'm not manipulating the information in a way that's destructive. So I can increase or decrease the cells to make everything uniform so it's easy for me to compare and contrast things without actually editing or manipulating the data. So if I come over here in this cell, I can give another demonstration about how to create an average function. So I'm going to hit the equals key, and I'm going to type the word average. And there it is, the same function we're going to use again. But if I have a long set of data, or I'm using a trackpad and not a mouse, it might be tough to scroll all that information. So if I scroll up and just look and see that my data starts in column C, even though it's getting blocked by this little helper right now, I know that's column C, and it starts in 2. So I can type C2 colon and you see it's starting to make the box for me. And I can scroll back down and say C54. That's where I want to go. So I could type C54, and it makes the box for me. And I could even, if I wanted to average more than that, I could just say, go to D54, and you see that it draws the box over there. So I could get an average of trials 1 and 2, which isn't what we're trying to do here, but just to highlight that you can navigate, or you can select and do all the work that you need to do just by typing letters, numbers, and symbols into the formula bar. You never have to touch your mouse, really. So coming back over here, there's my average for trial. That's trial 1. So I'm going to try to zoom in even more to show you this little box. So if I'm here on this function, in this cell, in the bottom corner of the box is a little dark square. And if I hover my mouse over that square, it changes my cursor. And if I click and drag on that box over, I can expand that function. So Excel is smart enough to realize what this formula is and what it's doing, and can update that formula in this row or column with the appropriate range selected for me. Now imagine if you were doing that across 20 or 30 different functions. That's a huge time saver than having to write that all the time. You just quickly click and drag that across. And so you can see in the formula bar up here, it's done it for E and it's done it for F. So with this very simple function, which is average, that makes it pretty easy, and Excel is going to get it right every time. But that isn't going to help us for these next functions. So we're going to have to write these next functions ourselves. Now, if I wanted to be able to have this big data set where everybody turned in all their information in one place, and I wanted to keep all my information here so I could look at it all together, it's difficult to pull out that information just for B, or for A2 and A3 and B2. For my different classes, it would be difficult to find just the average for just those cells. I might have to go through and individually select the cells that have that match, but then if I sort the table, it might get moved. So I'm probably going to have to copy all of this information into different Excel files, delete all the information I don't want. So I might have 3 different cell files, maybe 4 different Excel files if I have everybody and then each different class. Unless I realize that there's a function in Google Sheets and Microsoft Excel called AVERAGEIF. So let me show you AVERAGEIF. I'm going to start with equals and start typing average. And you can see from our list down here, there's an AVERAGEIF. So if I click on that, and I'm up here, you can see that the little tooltip has changed. Now, instead of just asking for numbers, it's asking for things like range and criteria and whatnot. So what I want to do with this, and I'm going to go ahead and zoom out for a moment so you can see the whole range of data. The first thing is I need to tell Excel where it needs to look. So this will make sense. I tell you what it's going to be looking for, but the first piece of information I need to give Excel is where the class period information is and where my data is that I care about for right now. So it's all of the information from A2 all the way down to B54. So I'm going to hit a comma, and you see up here that criteria is now selected. It's saying, okay, I will look there, but what am I looking for? So my class periods are actually the same format as cells on the table. So it could be a little bit dangerous unless I use the equals key. So I type, or the quotation. So I use a quotation and say A2, because I'm asking for Excel to look for all of my A2 students and tell me what the average is for just those A2 students for the fastball exam. So I have A2 and a comma, and now I need to tell Excel where the data is, the numbers that it needs to average. So the first range is asking where's all the information? Give me the big area that has the criteria and the average range. Then I told it what the criteria was, and now I need to tell it what data to average. So I can just use my cursor and select, and you see that it's selecting using a different color, and I've selected that data specifically. So I can close quote or close the parentheses and hit enter, and there is my average just for the A2 students. The A2 students were faster than the overall average. So good job, A2 students, on your fastball reaction time. That same formula can be modified to look at A3 or B2 as well. So let me zoom in. So now that you have seen how the ranges work, I'm going to zoom in so that you can see me write this formula. Zoom in as close as I can. There we go. So the formula to do the A2 average was this. Average if, open parentheses, A2 colon B54, comma, quote, A2 quote, comma, B52 colon B54. So I'm going to be looking in the ranges. All of this whole formula is going to be the same, except I need to switch out A2 for A3. So let me go ahead and write that. Average if, open parentheses, A2 colon B54, comma, quote, A3 quote, comma, B2 colon B54. Close parentheses, enter. So there is the average for the A3 students. Now it might be hard to compare the two because one has many more decimal places than the other, so I can just come up here to the average and I can just drag that down. And now that we have the same number of decimal places, this makes sense. It's easy to just look up and down and compare and contrast. So both my A2 and my A3 students had faster reaction times than the average, while A2 is still the fastest. So something's got to be pulling this average up, and I'm guessing it's in the B2 class. We'll find out. But I just do want to take another moment for a second just to reassure you that these buttons aren't doing anything bad. So I'm going to come over here, and I'm going to use the sum function just because that's the easiest for us to understand. So the sum, I messed up and I clicked enter when I shouldn't have, the sum of these numbers. So let's pick these numbers and add them all together. So you see the number is 4.157. If I modify one of these cells using the increase or decrease decimal place function, you'll notice that the sum doesn't change. I can decrease these cells, and even though it rounds the numbers in the visual it's giving me, it's not changing the math over here, because what's happening, even if I take this all the way down to 0, I'm asking this cell to add the sum, the actual values that are being calculated in the background of all of these cells. So no matter what Excel is showing me here, this is the exact perfect answer calculated or shown the way I want it to be shown, which is in this case with 3 decimal places. I can increase or decrease this cell to get the number that I want as well. So don't be worried about performing calculations on cells that have had their numbers rounded to make them easier for you to understand or perceive. If you're worried about using that number again somewhere else in another calculation, you're not going to be modifying that final calculation. But anyway, let me show you what we can do if we're in a hurry. So I just copy and pasted all of this information. We'll come back to that in a second. But if you look at that information up there, if I take this and drag it down, you'll notice that that little expand function that worked so well for average for us doesn't work here, because when Excel tried to update it for its new home, it messed up. Notice the difference between the thing that works the way we want it to and the thing that doesn't. It moved all the numbers up 1 or down 1, depending on your perspective. So that's not going to work. But we could copy and paste this cell, right? So I could copy and paste this cell into that cell. Well, let me give you the demonstration to make sure you see that it works correctly. Let me copy that cell and paste it into that cell. But it's messed up again. It did the same mistake because, again, Excel's trying to help us, but that didn't work. So remember how just a minute ago, I clicked into that formula and I copied the text that was in here. Now I'm going to click into here and paste the text in there, and you'll see that I have the exact same function as before. And since that's what I want, except to change this middle criteria, I'm just going to delete that and type B2 and hit enter. And boom, you can see that the B2 class had a 0.6 average. That's really pulling up the data. So if I look up, if I scroll up, or use my keyboard to move up, I can just visually scan this data and see that somebody from the B2 class reported 3.574 as their data. So this is something that's supposed to take about 0.2 seconds, and it took 3 whole seconds, 3.5 whole seconds. So I'm going to guess that this person accidentally typed and misentered their data, which is totally fine, because if you look at the rest of their data, it all makes perfect sense. It just seems like this one might be a mistype, which is totally fine. For right now, we're not going to go into how to control for those types of things. Your senior year, we do another unit on statistics, and we learn about standard deviations and variance and all kinds of stuff like that. Right here, we're just going to roll with this number, and that's fine because that's beyond what we're talking about right now. We're just going to compare some averages. So I can repeat this function, and I'm going to repeat it 1 or 2 more times on this video just to show you what we have to do once we get away from the data that we were looking at before. So let me go ahead and zoom out again. So let's say we want the average for the A2 class in task 1. So to do this function, where it's the same thing, it's average if, and I have to select my range. And here's the only thing that's different is that because I want to get the averages of this information based on the class someone is in, I have to select all of this data, including the fastball data, even though I don't want it or I'm not going to use it. And that's fine. Excel's just going to skip right over it. But that needs to be selected because we need the information on both ends. So we're going to go ahead and say those 2 pieces, that range, and then we're going to be looking for A2. Remember to put that in quotes, and then a comma, and then we have to do our average range, and that average range this time is going to be in task 1. Close our parentheses and hit enter, and that is the average for A2 students on task 1. And if we wanted to update all this information again, we can sit in there and collect what's in that function bar. And we come up here and we just switch this to 3. And then we do it again and switch this to B. And there is all of our data. And if we want to make all of them have the same decimal places, we can select all the data and then we can just adjust it so they're all the same. So I wouldn't adjust the decimal places until you're all done, but you can finish with the data set that I've provided you. This is data from January 2021. So your year is going to have to be a different set of data, but it'll be organized in a similar fashion. And you can use the average and AVERAGEIF functions to calculate the overall class average and then the individual class functions or individual class averages by using the AVERAGEIF function. And not to get too far into it, but you could also use the AVERAGEIF with a plural if you wanted to collect multiple data points. And if you had not only the class period that somebody was in, but what their device was that they used or what day of the week that they did the test. And you could say, here are the people from A2 who took the test on Monday, and here's people from A2 who took the test on Tuesday. And let's compare and contrast the averages from the same population of students, but who took them on different days, or people who are taller than 6 feet versus shorter than 6 feet, or whatever data you wanted to collect in your form. You could then analyze it based on the information and using functions here. And there's just scratching the surface with using these average functions, but spreadsheets are a superpower. And I really hope that looking at all this information and seeing what some of the possibilities are, you might reach for, or might not be upset when I ask you to reach for an Excel spreadsheet instead of a calculator. So I'll put in the description of this video, I'll put some links to information, some support documentation from Excel, explaining those functions in more depth. And hopefully those will help you complete your assignment for 2.2.4, which will be to average and perform these calculations. I'm going to check your cells and make sure that there's a function in there and not just the number that you typed because you did it somewhere else. I promise learning how to use spreadsheets is going to be worth it. So if you have any questions or need help with anything, as always, you can email me or ask me for some help, and I'm happy to walk through. But hopefully this video does enough instruction that you'll be able to figure it out on your own from there.